Thank you for inviting me here this afternoon and allowing me to present this rather unconventional research project. It's called Neonatal Nursing During the COVID-19 Global Pandemic, a thematic analysis of personal reflections. But although these are the reflections of neonatal nurses, I think that you'll find that there's parallels to all sorts of nurses and all sorts of nursing during the pandemic. April 2020, it's only 18 months ago, but it seems a lot longer, back when nursing was nursing as we knew it, that within the neonatal community we were developing family-centred care, we were introducing family integrated care. Basically, we were giving the babies back as much as possible to their parents and involving the parents in every aspect of their care and of their the decision making around their care. We were trying to bring in siblings, we were involving the extended family, especially grandparents. It felt as if, as a profession, we were moving forward. And then the pandemic struck. And we just didn't know what was going to happen. And to people like me, people with a lot of experience of neonatal nursing, but now I lecture, I research, I do the occasional shift. I do more shifts now than I did before the pandemic, I have to say. But I'm not on the front line in the way that I used to be. What I am is Editor-in-Chief of the Journal of Neonatal Nursing, and I really wondered if I could use that role and use the journal in any positive way. I'm a sailor. I've done the round the world yacht race, and if you're out, especially in the middle of an ocean, and you see clouds gathering in a storm coming towards you, you just don't know what's going to happen. It's a very, very frightening thing. I used that as the title of my editorial about that time last year, but I wondered as I was doing so, was there any other way in which I could be helpful? And with a team who I'll introduce in a minute, we had a little discussion on how we could use the journal, and we decided to set up a reflective writing project where we asked neonatal nurses, our readership, to contribute reflections to the journal. They could be written reflections, it could be audio, they could be video blogs, they could be anything they wanted, but this felt like something important, something that was happening in history, something that we should really record for posterity, something that I hope in our lifetime will never happen again. I worked for Queen's University Belfast, and at that time they were offering very small grants in order to support small pieces of research to see if we could capture this impact of the pandemic and how it was affecting all sorts of communities. So at that time, I'd been talking to some really eminent neonatal nurses. The first person I spoke to was Julia Petty. Julia was Vice Chair of the Neonatal Nurses Association, and it just seemed like good manners, even though I am Editor-in-Chief of the journal, to speak to her about the fact that I wanted to do this writing project. She said that's very strange because Katie Gallagher, who is a nurse researcher at University College London, had been speaking to her about something very, very similar. By this time, I had the small grants in it, and we were able to employ Chloe Shaw, who is a researcher at UCL. She actually worked for Queen's University Belfast for a couple of months. We were so lucky to get her in order to analyse our data, and we also involved Alex Mancini, who is a neonatal nurse involved in palliative care, because she was doing a lot of support of nurses who the support that she was giving nurses, let's just say, was gone beyond palliative care. She was just supporting them in their roles at the time. So, with our newly found piece of research, we knew, or at least there was emerging data at the time to say that nurses were having high rates of depression, anxiety, insomnia, all the things you'd expect as part of this pandemic, and that it wasn't always the nurses who were in the front line of caring for the pandemic, because back then we believed that that COVID was not a disease that was going to badly affect the neonates in our care. Still to some extent isn't, although that is changing a little bit with the new variants. But what all we wanted to really do was capture the experiences and see how our nurses were going to cope with this pandemic as it happened. So what we decided at the time was that we'd take the reflective blogs from the writing project, and we'd analyse them. We'd run a thematic analysis and see what commonalities, what themes there were. So this was a purposive sample. They were all nurses working in the neonatal area. We would have accepted any blogs from doctors or from any other healthcare professional, but it was all nurses who replied, possibly because of the journal that we advertised in. It was very passive. We basically sent out the invitation in the journal, and we put it on the website. And if we were having a conversation with anybody, we would have mentioned it, but it was a very, very low key kind of invitation to take part, because we basically didn't want to upset anybody or put anybody under pressure at the time. 24 neonatal nurses took part. They were from the clinical area, from education, from research roles, and they were from 11 countries throughout the world. I think, yeah, every continent was involved. That was phenomenal. That made us really happy. 2 of the nurses did do a joint reflection. 23 of them were female and 1 was male, which would be a very good reflection of the breakdown of the neonatal nursing gender balance anyway. And after we finished doing this piece of research, there were other people who sent blogs, and although we published them, you never know, we may do a second reflection. Because the data had been taken from the reflections that we'd already published in the journal, we had a chat with the ethics committee about that, because we'd asked people to contribute a reflection to the journal. We hadn't asked them to take part in a research study. Now, my thoughts had been that since the blogs were all already published and in the public domain, it would be okay to just use them. But after discussion with the ethics committee, we wrote to everyone who had sent a blog and asked for their expressed permission to use them in the research, in this piece of research. They were all not only said yes, but were thrilled to have it happen. But I think that was a very important piece of, a very important stage in what happened. Then the wonderful Chloe uploaded it all into InVivo, and we did the reflexive thematic analysis using Bronze and Clark's 2019 method, basically to try to build a reflexive story. And the data were coded in the usual way, and the codes were developed into broader themes, and those were organised in a hierarchy. And at any time, 2 researchers were involved in that, just to try to reduce researcher bias as much as possible. So, what did we find? There were 4 main themes. Those were protector, challenges to the human qualities of our care, vulnerability, and resilience. And in order to build our interpretive story, we mapped out the themes that we found. The map looked a little bit like this, and you can see the interrelationships between the themes, and I'll discuss those a little bit more as we go through. As neonatal nurses, we've always thought of ourselves as protectors. We protect the babies. We firstly protect the babies, and we protect the families. And this caused great anxiety, because suddenly we were protecting the babies from their own families in case they brought COVID into the unit. Completely counterintuitive. But we also felt, and this was new, that we had to protect our own families. As neonatal nurses, we don't usually worry too much about bringing infection home, but that was a great big theme, and obviously, like a lot of other nurses, people were leaving home, they were staying away from home, they were talking to their children, to their next of kin, by video calls rather than face to face. It was a very strange time. And this protecting the babies from their families was so counterintuitive to us as neonatal nurses, but we could see that the PPE that we were using was forming a barrier. It was a barrier to us talking to the parents. It was a barrier to us. Babies watch faces, they interact to smiles, they interact to facial expression. If you've got a mask on, they don't necessarily get that, and that was a very, very hard balance for us to find. It made us feel very vulnerable, and I'm saying us because I did do a little bit of clinical work at this time, and I love one of my Australian colleagues made the comparison to flying a plane while we're building it around us, and it felt a bit like that. It felt as if we were making it up as we go along. Every shift we worked, we had to be flexible because there was so much to learn. But with this learning, I think, came great teamwork. We worked together. I like to think we're always a friendly and cohesive lot, but we had that thing, that ghetto mentality where we're doing things that nobody else has ever had to do before. So we bound together in doing it, and we bound together to acquire all this learning and to pass all this learning on to our students. And I think for me at least, the most interesting part of our map was this part where, from the guilt of not being able to give this human qualities of care that we want to, came all the peer emotional support and the resourcefulness that helped us build the resilience. And I think there probably are lessons there for the future. We saw this very much as a balance between how much we need to protect and how much we need to concentrate on the baby as an integral part of the family, and the baby as a developing human being who needs its family in order to help him or her to develop their full potential. So, what did we do? We uncovered the experiences of the neonatal nurses and found that the challenges that faced us were common throughout the world, and actually I think probably common throughout the nursing profession, that changes in hospital policy made us protect babies, but we were protecting them from their parents, from their families, and that was very compromising to the kind of care that we want to give. The concern about infecting one's own family was very significant, and again, not only for neonatal nurses, but for all nurses at the time. But it was this balance that was very, very interesting. We learned how to involve parents who weren't on the spot, and whereas our gold standard will always be that we want parents to be present, we want them to spend as much time as is humanly possible with their babies, but that's not possible for every parent. Some parents have other care and responsibilities, they have other children, they have jobs and financial responsibilities, or they're physically not well themselves. We've learned a little bit, and we've broken down a few barriers as to how we're allowed and how we're able to communicate to parents who can't be there every minute of every day. I like the quote from Franklin D. Roosevelt, "Calm seas never a skillful sailor made." And in this picture, I illustrated very much by, on the calmest of calm days, going aground somewhere where I really shouldn't have, at the side of a marina I know like the back of my hand. In the storm that we've just been through, we have learned so much. We've been able to draw many conclusions from this about the nature of neonatal nursing before, during, and hopefully after the pandemic. The most important conclusions are about our strength as a profession and how we've managed to get through this, and maybe about our responsibility to parents who can't be at the bedside all day, and how we can support those parents. We've published this as a paper in the Journal of Neonatal Nursing. It's out there if anybody is interested in reading it. Lots of references, lots of stuff coming out about COVID, and the evidence base is growing all the time. Any questions?